Lady Sybil is an intriguing but slightly dull story in my opinion that takes place in a mansion where an elderly mother of two middle-aged men, Lady Sybil, fears that a mysterious phantom walks the grounds at night and wants to kill her. It balances this fine line between psychological distress and supernatural hauntings. While the story plods along a little slowly, the dialogue is pretty solid and the performances are mostly pretty good, Denholm Elliott giving a truly excellent performance, which is always expected of him. Kathleen Nesbitt perfectly portrays Lady Sybil as a scared and vulnerable yet slightly cold Victorian granny who favours one son over the other. John Osborne isn't great as Edward, but I don't know if his odd line delivery was a deliberate choice or a direction from Simon Langton, who otherwise delivers quite a good presentation. The set design is really solid, and the trend of beautiful film sequences set on the manor grounds create a breathtakingly beautiful gothic atmosphere for the story, particularly when the alleged phantom roams around at night, a phantom one naturally assumes to be Edward, intent on scaring his mother to death.
I never used the word phantom. I spoke of a prowler. What I have done is to issue a complaint against an unknown prowler.
You haven't written to the police, Mamma?
Why should that disturb you, Edward?
I might be accused of arrested.
I regret to say you are becoming more like your late father every day.
I'm going to spoil the ending straight away because it's the only thing that really saves the play for me. While Geoffrey spends most of the runtime trying to psychologically trick his mentally vulnerable brother Edward into admitting he has some kind of problem and needs to do more with his life, it's revealed that Geoffrey is actually the dreaded phantom, suffering from some kind of split personality that causes him to snap and haunt his mother, a woman who spends most of the play treating Geoffrey like some kind of prized trophy while resenting her less successful and less ambitious son Edward. I like the final scene set within the story that Geoffrey is telling the Club of the Damned because even though Edward's wife decided not to go through with the divorce, she joins Sybil in basically bossing Edward around and forcing him to man up, even though the two of them were shown to have quite a contentious relationship earlier on.
How dare you blame it on me and my house?
Nobody could bear to live in her house.
For what reasons, pray?
She knows those reasons only too well.
It's monstrous. I have brought up two sons in this house.
Oh yes, Sybil. Have you?
Earlier in the play, the younger maid ran off with the young man who worked on the grounds, and there's a hilarious music cue that plays when the new maid is shown to be an older redhead instead of a pretty brunette. It's a little bit mean, if you ask me. The final words Geoffrey speaks to the Club of the Damned when they ask if he is truly cured are genuinely haunting.
If one may ask, are you really cured?
Cured? Well, naturally, I managed to persuade the authorities of that idiotic lunatic asylum that I was, and that's all that matters, surely. After all, I am a doctor.
Well, so the phantom of Black Gables will never strike again, eh?
Well, I don't know. Papa hasn't been talking to me for some time.
Speaking about the play in more depth, the uncomfortable coexistence between the three characters is genuinely brilliant, especially since Edward and Geoffrey aren't even shown to dislike each other that much beyond the occasional brotherly bash. Edward even wanted to visit Geoffrey in the asylum before being dismissed by his mother and wife, essentially leaving him stuck in the house with two mummies. Geoffrey's studies of the unconscious mind and his fascination with the changing colour based on mood of his pet chameleon has him develop a theory that two distinct personalities exist within the mind. He seeks to treat the emotionally tortured Edward by convincing him he must reconcile with his inner self to find peace, and extols him to do as you will to become free. He examines his mother later to convince her that she is in no danger, and knowing what happens at the end, it has an extremely dark undertone throughout the whole thing, and it improves the play in my opinion. Its themes of sexual repression in the character of Arabella, the comparison to Jekyll and Hyde like Mr. Nightingale, the melodramatic gothic presentation, and the pretty decent plot don't allow me to award the play any less than a 7. It's not perfect, but it's a good addition to the series.
Still, may I drink to all those among us who have succeeded in freeing themselves from the intolerable tyranny of women and children. God bless us.
Hello, this is Aline White Swan. Welcome to the mysterious Domain Movie Palace. Are you afraid of dolls? You know, I have a small antique doll collection, and this one is a Dolly Madison, and she's over 200 years old. She was married to James Madison, and he was the 4th president of the United States. So, I myself, I really like these little China dollies, but I've known grown men when I was in England that were terrified of dolls.
Anyone here have pediophobia? No, that doesn't mean you're a paedophile, it means you have a fear of dolls. I find them creepy, but I don't struggle to sleep at night if there's one in my bedroom.
But that thing, it scares me.
Unfortunately, Victoria is more studio-based than the preceding few stories, which means the once beautiful and atmospheric film sequences that took place in the drawing room used by the Club of the Damned are once again shot on videotape. It's an intriguing start because the gentleman who wishes to join the club has their face covered and requests one of the other members to read the story instead. Victoria is a pretty fantastic story and is the only one not penned by Robert Muller, instead being written by Sue Lake, who also served as a script associate for the other female-focused stories. She pleases the audience with a smart script that explores concealed sexuality, Victorian hypocrisy, and sinister revenge enacted by one from beyond the grave. Set in Hungary and then in England in the years 1873 and 1875, it follows Paul, his disabled and cardiovascular diseased wife Elizabeth, who it is immediately implied had an affair with a Hungarian soldier she still misses dearly, their creepy daughter Victoria, who has a habit of burying her dolls for misbehaving, the domineering governess Margaret Graham, and the elderly Carpathian, Katie, who is portrayed excellently by Susan Richards, a Welsh actress who learned Hungarian specifically for the role. Because of the affair and the wheelchair-bound Elizabeth's erratic behaviour brought on by her disability and heart condition, the contentious marriage is marred by arguments and loveless times spent barely talking to each other. Elizabeth spends most of her time sewing roses like the ones she insists she needs to be surrounded by. Victoria's only real positive relationship is with Katie, who is a little bit on the weird side. When Elizabeth desperately requires her pills, Paul cruelly and fatally takes advantage of his wife's condition by spilling her pills and failing to give them to her on time. Pretty soon afterwards, Paul remarries to a near-identical Hungarian woman. In her mother's death, Katie attempts to gift Victoria with a really creepy doll called Rosa she esoterically chants to. Katie unfortunately misses the mark, but Victoria's stepmother, Teresa, promises to give the doll to Victoria. Paul's relationship with both Victoria and Teresa gradually deteriorates, with Victoria becoming obsessed with Rosa, being rude to Margaret, and spending a lot of time speaking to the doll, which creepily seems to be one step further through its embroidering of roses like how Elizabeth used to do, and Teresa feeling like she's married to two different men.
I am loving two people. One is kind and humorous and considerate. The other is a distant stranger. Is that what it means to be a wife in England?
Things only get worse when Teresa suspects that Paul had an affair with Margaret, although she doesn't seem to get the hint when Paul takes a blatantly homosexual interest in his young friend Edward, a horse rider. To make things worse, Victoria taunts Margaret over her bachelorette status and her feelings for Teresa, suggesting that there are two unconventional relationships slowly developing. Victoria becomes much ruder and callous, to the point Margaret requests the doll be confiscated and Paul suggests sending Victoria to a boarding school, but Teresa refuses, only to also be disturbed by the sound of the girl conversing with the disembodied voice of Elizabeth.
Victoria! Victoria, please!
All episodes before this dealt with very lustful themes and hidden desires, but this one is arguably the most blatant and amplified by the gay and lesbian overtones. This obviously would have been quite outrageous even for 1977, but it works to the story's benefit hugely, offering something that none of them really have up until this point, and it shows that this highly underrated and forgotten cult show wasn't afraid to push its storytelling to the time period's limits, both Victorian 1800s and conservative 1970s. Paul's hidden hatred for being married to a woman comes into full swing after he and Edward have one too many brandies, showing what a truly disgusting guy he is. Not only is he a murderer, he's also a hateful creep who blames his unhappy wife for everything. Meanwhile, Victoria's love for Rosa reaches a peak, which results in a truly creepy and violent scene that satisfyingly ends Paul's life.
Vengeance!
Now, all the women in the house can be happy.
So she is now a lesbian.
It also acts like Rosa is going to go away, but then she just kind of doesn't. The obvious twist in the ending segment is that, well, Victoria was the auditioning member, and after insinuating that the club members might be gay, they allow her into the club, as they seemingly do to her delightful doll, Rosa. It would have been more effective if they pretended like Elizabeth's soul left the doll at the end of the story, only to be revealed to be alive in the Club of the Damned segment, but that'd make the play too perfect. We can't do that. This one also gets a 9 out of 10. It's slightly better than the werewolf one in my opinion, but they're about equal and I love them dearly. The only thing I truthfully remembered about Night of the Marionettes is that it was my least favourite after I finished watching the show for the first time, and after watching it again, this one and A Ghost in Venice kind of tie as my least favourites. Now don't get me wrong, there are things about it I do like, but the bad almost outweighs the good. This week's person looking for initiation into the Club of the Damned is author Howard Lawrence, played both young and old by Gregory Jackson. His story is one so horrible that he could apparently never bring himself around to publishing it. So here we have a guy who is obsessed with gothic fiction, specifically Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. During his family trip to Switzerland, he's trying to follow in the footsteps of her, Lord Byron and Percy Bysshe Shelley, perhaps in hopes of finding the origin of Frankenstein's creation. The family of three arrive at a creepy innkeeper's that the trio are purported to have visited in 1816, where they meet the creepy owner Herr Hubert, his female relatives that don't really do much, and Otto.
What is your favourite colour?
Hubert is a gaunt man played by Vladek Sybil, who offers a great performance that would be a highlight if his screen time wasn't so limited. Sidney Bromley also offers a great performance as Otto, but he also isn't in it that much. Despite the warm welcome from the otherwise pretty unusual Rocky Horror hosts, there's a subtle look down on them that Howard in particular displays, although he does it in quite a polite manner. He's respectfully snooty. Some religious tensions prevalent in the 1800s are highlighted, namely when they acknowledge there isn't a single crucifix in the German Expressionist building. The set design throughout the whole thing is great, perhaps the best throughout the entire show. It perfectly fits in with the gothic ghostly vibe that the show revolves around. Howard's daughter Mary is played by Pauline Moran, who delivers a very odd performance as a bubbly, psychologically disturbed young woman who consistently writes in her journal about the concerns for her ailing mother Elspeth, played by Kathleen Byron, as the days go on. The pacing is a little bit odd in this one. They aren't in the building for very long, but by day 2, it seems, they're already going a little bit crazy and seeing things that aren't there, which isn't helped when Otto tells them some alarming facts about the inn, such as how there haven't been guests in years. There's a slightly creepy sequence where an old man chases Howard throughout the halls in the night, and this will be important later. Howard becomes obsessed with these English books that suggest Shelley did in fact stay at the inn back in 1816, and the obsession grows while Elspeth decreases mentally and becomes over-reliant on her hip flask full of schnapps. There's talk during one of the really weird dining scenes where Elspeth wakes up late and misses breakfast, and her weirdly acting husband and daughter basically tell her to go fuck herself because Mary seemingly has a spiritual connection to the author. In another scene, they are told about a marionette show that they all decide to attend, and honestly, this sequence is pretty great. The makeup and costumes are eerie, gothic, and beautiful, the physical performances are angelic and strange, and the reactions of the audience compared to the utterly terrified family are hilarious. The performance is clearly what seems to have inspired Mary Shelley to write her book, featuring a Frankenstein's monster puppet murder an innocent and beautiful woman in a white dress before being killed by its unholy-looking creator. Elspeth falls further into alcoholic decline while Mary continues to pen her diary in a novel-like fashion. I wish the play focused more on this aspect of the story, but there's this great shot in the otherwise blandly edited play I really like. Further unexplained sounds throughout the inn during the night once again stir Lawrence and Mary's curiosity as they celebrate, convinced that they have found the origin of Shelley's story. They soon find a locked upstairs room as the origin of the noise. A glimpse through the door reveals the existence of a creepy workshop or science lab where unholy creations are born. It appears the Hubert family are not creating simple string-operated marionettes, but are turning deceased guests into reanimated life forms, just like one Victor Frankenstein. In the end, the old man in the halls is revealed to be a gravedigger who retrieves corpses for the puppets, and Lawrence becomes truly insane, convinced that Herr Hubert is trying to drive him and his family mad, when in reality, the Hubert family are quite happy to be left alone, with Herr Hubert trying to get it into Lawrence's mind that he is driving himself and his family to the brink of madness. The monster then escapes from the lab during a pretty trippy yellow-filtered sequence and attacks Mary, reducing her to a mental state not too dissimilar to the marionettes.
Thus we discovered that what Mary Shelley wrote during that rainy summer of 1816 was not inspired by a dream, but by the dreadful events that she, like my own family, had experienced at the Gasthaus Ritterhof before travelling on to Geneva. And there, in the haunted nights of Lord Byron's Villa Diodati, the young girl toiled, compounding her appalling experiences into an alleged work of fiction.
The ending was a little bit odd to me. The Dam decide not to believe the story, but we never see Lawrence get taken away or anything. He just cries and says a kind of corny line at the end of the play straight into the camera.
What my poor, mad, beloved daughter and I have seen, we have seen. What we have heard, we have heard. What we have dreamed, we have dreamed.
I thought it would have been better if his wife and daughter showed up being controlled like puppets by an unaged Herr Hubert, or if he just got dragged away to be executed like Nightingale was. Technically, this story is incredibly strong. Some of the film to videotape edits are pretty jarring, but the use of light and shadows turns the already creepy sets into genuine horror pieces that have beautiful rustic Victorian aesthetic. There's also Star Wars screen wipes again, which is pretty funny. The Doctor Who-esque incidental music was distracting.
Oh, Mama, do stop fussing. Oh. Leave that alone, Mama! It's mine.
And while Robert Muller delivers for the most part, the script isn't as tight as most of the preceding stories, in my opinion. In the end, Night of the Marionettes winds up being interesting to me only because I can use my mind to think of ways it could have been done better. I still give it a strong 6 out of 10. It's also worth noting Vladek Sybil won the Dracula Society's prestigious Hamilton Dean Award for the Best Dramatic Performance or Presentation in the Gothic horror supernatural genres for his performance, which was very well earned. Dorabella is my absolute favourite. I love this story, and usually vampires aren't my go-to when it comes to horror. I'm more of a ghost, psychological, or a creature feature guy, what can I say? This is probably one of the best vampire horrors I've ever experienced. What I do like about vampires is that they're essentially parasitic in nature, meaning they suck the life and joy out of every living thing for the sake of their own survival. This story captures that perfectly.
I wished it to.
Just stop.
Thank you.
Tell me your name.
My name is Dorabella.
As the final episode of Supernatural, it ends the series on a high note. The Club of the Damned have a meeting with Philip Hambleton, who is portrayed excellently by the very talented and beautiful David Robb, a youthful-looking man who claims his story takes place before trains were introduced. The collected and intelligent man recounts his adventures with his more naive rich friend Walter von Lamont, who is perfectly played by Jeremy Clyde. Walter is something of a lost wanderer who, after inheriting a family fortune via tragic circumstances, seeks to use his riches to find his lost childhood. While stopping off at a coaching inn, they encounter the beautiful, enigmatic Dorabella, who Walter is instantly smitten by. She performs a beautiful serenade, juggles, seemingly hypnotises other men into juggling, and makes her caged bird disappear. When Walter dares to show her affection, the sickly poet accompanying her goes mental and lacerates his hand trying to attack Walter, who cannot sleep that night as he thinks of Dorabella. When the duo leave the next morning, they find the poet dead with his blood drained, being told that a wild animal did it, which, of course, Walter and Philip think is complete horseshit. Regardless, they are told to bring Dorabella's coach and her things to her home, and upon arrival, she agrees to marry Walter, but they make a few stops along the way. Town after town, Walter seems to get even more infatuated with Dorabella, suggesting that Philip is jealous of their love. When she loses her fucking shit over being booked at a less grotty inn against her wishes, Philip comes in bearing no fucks, but his bravery to defy her turns to fear when she hypnotises a servant to come on to Philip, and he sees she has no reflection in the mirror. The relationship between Philip and Walter gets worse and worse, culminating in a serious argument where Philip, without actually saying it out loud, tells Walter that he thinks Dorabella is a vampire and is sucking his soul out of his body. We've all been there, Chief. Trust me.
At least carry this close to your heart, for your protection.
Poor Philip. You love her too, and her indifference has unhinged your mind.
When Walter dies almost trying to move a coffin, they decide to stick together.
Are you hurt?
What?
When they finally arrive at the house, Dorabella's father, played by the suitably creepy John Justin, who gets the award for the scariest scene in the whole show, approves of their love, explaining that they come from a generation of families that seek out foreigners to breed with and continue the bloodline. Oh, what a ritual. On the night of the wedding, Walter is no more than a haunted shell of a man, pale, sweaty, and deprived of any sleep.
As I watched the ceremony approach its climax, the passing of the spiked ring whose history Dorabella's father had related to us during our first evening at the castle, I meditated over means by which I might rescue my poor friend, before I, too, succumbed totally to the wasting sickness now afflicting all of us. Surely the most horrible disease imaginable. To be condemned for all eternity to exist in a grey limbo suspended between life and death.
He sees one last horrifying vision of what I assume to be Dorabella's age-accurate appearance and dies, being reduced to a mere pile of dirt and maggots. Philip, having pulled through right to the end, begs Dorabella and her father to release Walter and take him, but his bravery only seeks to make him a target for their horrific plans, and he is adopted as Dorabella's new bridegroom. When the Club of the Damned pompously protest the realism of Philip's story, he reveals himself to have willingly become Dorabella's bridegroom, forever remembering the friend he lost in the process. Essentially, Philip was the Chad from Rags, and Walter was the beta cuck with money, and working for what you get overcomes receiving it. But either way, you might get some blood-sucking creep and his daughter biting your neck if you journey too far from home. Good message. I love this teleplay. Dorabella's form of vampiricism is essentially a mind-bending, body-destroying disease akin to a violent fever that drives men mad as they lust after her. It could be seen as a metaphor for drug addiction, sexually transmitted infections, toxic relationships, or many other things. The cast are fucking excellent. Anea Marson portrays Dorabella with such increasingly unnerving devilishness. Clyde perfectly portrays the confident young adventurer turning into a broken shell of a human. Justin turns the charm up to Christopher Lee levels. And Rob does his job as the level-headed and thoughtful friend who winds up coming out on top thanks to his impulse control and quick thinking. The atmosphere of this story, the set design, the dreamlike cinematography during the daytime film sequences compared to the gothic blackness of the nighttime scenes, the tight script. It's a boiling cauldron of everything that makes this series work and beyond. Fans of gothic horror, anthologies, and vampiric fiction should give this episode alone a go. 10 out of 10. Supernatural is dated in many ways. It's also brilliant. It's something I don't regret owning, and it's something I don't regret revisiting either. I love this show. I don't love the fly constantly buzzing around in my bedroom, potentially corrupting the audio as I try and swat it, but I do love this show. Dorabella, Countess Alona, the werewolf reunion, and Viktoria will always hold a special place in my heart as pieces of horror fiction. And they inspire me as a horror fan and creative. If you want to check it out, you can find them on this amazing ladies channel, or you can buy the DVD, which is distributed by the BFI, which is an institution, so you'll be supporting them with your purchase. And I would just like to say to all of those who are enjoying the channel, thank you so much for watching this video, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Stay classy. And stay sophisticated.